The scream reached him before he reached the door. He had been coming back from the car, keys still in his hand, briefcase still on his shoulder, 3 steps from the front entrance of his own house, when he heard his wife's voice cut through the afternoon air like something thrown hard against glass. Not raised, not sharp. Screamed, the kind of sound that belongs to no context he had ever associated with the inside of his home, and his hand went still on the door handle, and for a moment he stood there on his own front step and did not move. What he heard next was silence. And then, low and without tremor, a woman's voice. 3 words, calm in the way that a lake is calm after something has broken its surface, not undisturbed, but settled, deliberately and at considerable cost. Marcus Hale was 47 years old. He owned 4 hotels, a catering company, and a building services firm that employed over 300 people in 6 cities. He had negotiated with difficult men across 3 continents. He had sat in rooms where the silence was a weapon and learned to be comfortable in it, not because he enjoyed discomfort, but because he had understood early that the person who cannot tolerate silence will eventually say the thing they should not say. He had made his money by being the patient one. He had kept his money by being the thorough one. He had, in 30 years of business, prided himself on one quality above all others. He knew when something was wrong before he could prove it. He stood on his front step and felt something shift in the architecture of his afternoon. He turned the handle. The entrance hall was lit from the high window the way it always was at this hour, that particular gold light of a midweek afternoon that made everything look slightly more permanent than it was. The floor was white marble, sealed and clean. The staircase curved up to the left. A vase of white flowers stood on the console table, fresh, arranged with precision. Standing at the far end of the hall, at the threshold between the entrance and the corridor that led to the kitchen, was Rose Pemberton. She was holding a mop. Her back was to him. She was completely still. Standing 3 feet from her, between the staircase and the wall, was his wife. Diana Hale was 44 years old and had been a beautiful woman for so long that she had come to regard it as a form of competence. She was wearing the cream linen jacket she had bought in Florence, and her dark hair was up. And even now, even in this, the aftermath of what he had heard through the door, she held herself with the composed authority of a woman who expected to be right in every room she entered. She had not seen Marcus come in. Her attention was entirely on Rose. Rose had not moved. Marcus set his briefcase down on the floor beside the door, very slowly, without sound. Diana said, "I will not ask you again. When I say the floor in the morning room is unacceptable, it means I expect you to redo it, not to stand there looking at me." Rose said, "The morning room floor was cleaned at 6:45 this morning, Mrs. Hale. The log confirms it." Diana said, "The log." She repeated the word with a precision that was its own form of contempt. "I am not interested in your log. I am telling you what I saw." Rose said nothing. Diana said, "Do you understand what I'm paying for? Or do I need to explain that to you as well?" Marcus watched his wife's hands. He had been watching Diana's hands since the first month of their marriage, because they told him things her face did not. Her right hand was perfectly still. Her left was moving, the smallest possible motion at the thumb joint. She was angrier than she was showing. Rose said, "I understand your expectation, Mrs. Hale. I'll look at the morning room again. You'll do it now." "Yes, ma'am." Diana turned. She turned in the unhurried way of a person who is finished with something, and she walked 3 steps toward the staircase. And that was when she saw Marcus. She stopped. Marcus said, "How long?" It was not a question. His voice was very even. Diana said, "I didn't know you were home early." He said, "How long has this been happening?" She looked at him for a moment with the expression she used when she was deciding which version of a thing to offer, and then she said, in a different tone, lighter, reframed, "I was just telling Rose that the morning room needs to be redone. It's not a crisis." Marcus looked past his wife. Rose had not turned around. She was still facing the corridor, her back to both of them. The mop handle held the way a person holds something they are using to maintain their composure, rather than to clean anything. He said, "Rose." She turned. In 14 months of working in his house, Rose Pemberton had never looked at him with anything other than professional steadiness. She was in her mid-40s perhaps, with dark eyes and the particular stillness that some people develop through long practice of working in other people's spaces without taking up more room than they need. He had noticed her, in the vague way of a man who notices functional things. She was thorough. She was punctual. She appeared to anticipate what needed doing before being told. He had said good morning to her in the corridor perhaps 40 times. He had not had a real conversation with her in the entire 14 months. He looked at her now, and she looked back at him, and something in the directness of it made him think, without knowing exactly why, that she had spent a long time being looked past rather than at. He said, "The morning room floor. Did you clean it this morning?" She said, "At 6:45, sir, the log. I'm not asking for the log. I'm asking you." She said, "Yes, I cleaned it." He said, "Is this the first time something like this has happened?" Rose was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved, not to Diana, not nervously, but with the careful measurement of someone deciding how true to be. Then she said, "No, sir." Marcus turned to look at his wife. Diana said his name. She said it the way she said it when she wanted to redirect the temperature of a room. He said, quietly, "We'll talk about this tonight." And then, to Rose, "Thank you. You can leave the morning room." Rose nodded once and walked down the corridor and was gone. Diana watched him for a moment with an expression that had moved past reframing and arrived at something harder to name. Then she went up the stairs. Marcus stood alone in the entrance hall. The gold afternoon light held everything in its particular quality of arrested time. The white flowers in the vase had no scent he could detect. The floor was spotless. He picked up his briefcase. He went to his study. He sat at his desk without turning on the lamp and looked at the pattern the window made on the wall and thought about the difference between a thing happening once and a thing having happened many times before he was in a position to witness it. He thought, "I have been in this house for 2 years. I have held meetings with difficult men. I have read faces across tables and known when I was being managed and when I was being told the truth. I sat at dinner in this house 3 nights ago and talked about the hotel project in Edinburgh and did not look at the woman who brought in the soup tureen because I was looking at my phone." He thought, "I don't know anything about her." That was the thing that stayed with him, not what he had heard through the door, though that stayed too, like a sound that continues after the source has stopped. It was the specific embarrassment of realizing that a person had been living in close proximity to his daily life for over a year, and he could not have told you, with any confidence, what her circumstances were. Whether she had children, whether she was managing something difficult, whether the steadiness he had observed in her was strength or endurance or some ratio of both that he had never thought to calculate. He turned on his lamp. He pulled open the household administration folder, the one his PA kept updated, the one he had not opened in months because Diana handled the household staff and had always handled it, and he had not questioned that division of labor because it was efficient and because he had not been paying attention. He found Rose Pemberton's file in 4 minutes. He read it in 7. She had been hired through the agency 14 months ago. Before that, 8 years as a senior housekeeper at a country estate in Wiltshire. A reference that was, by any standard, exceptional. Before that, a degree in early childhood education from a university in the north of England that she had apparently never used in any professional capacity, which struck him as the kind of biographical detail that, once noticed, resists explanation. Emergency contact. A number listed as Oliver Pemberton, relationship son. Single contact. 1. He looked at the file for a moment longer. Then he closed it and sat back and looked at the wall. In the morning, Diana was composed in the way she was always composed when she had decided that a thing had been resolved by being ignored long enough. She ate breakfast at the kitchen island and talked about a lunch she was having with someone from her committee and whether the Edinburgh dining room renovation had been confirmed. She asked whether he was back for dinner. He said he wasn't sure. She said fine and touched his arm lightly, a habitual gesture, the kind that has stopped meaning anything specific and become simply the punctuation of a marriage, and left. Marcus waited 20 minutes. Then he went downstairs to find Rose. She was in the utility room on the lower floor. A long, narrow room with a deep ceramic sink and shelves of cleaning materials, and a folding table where the laundry was sorted. The fluorescent light above the table was slightly too bright for the space, the way utility rooms always are, as though whoever installed it had wanted to leave no ambiguity about what kind of room this was and what kind of work happened in it. Rose was sorting laundry with the methodical efficiency of someone for whom methodical efficiency has long since stopped being a performance and become simply how things are done. She folded each item precisely before placing it in the appropriate pile, and the piles were even, and the surface of the table was organized in the way that things are organized when the person organizing them is also thinking about something else, and the organization is the part of their mind that is still functioning at full capacity. She saw him in the doorway and straightened. He said, "I want to talk to you, not about the morning room." She waited. He said, "Yesterday wasn't the first time. You said that." She said, "No, sir. How long has this been going on?" She folded a cloth in her hands, slowly, without looking at it. Then she said, "Since about the 4th month. 10 months. He absorbed that. He said, "Why didn't you say something?" She looked at him with an expression that was not unkind, but was entirely honest, the way a person is honest when they have stopped expecting the answer to change anything. She said, "To whom, sir?" He had no answer for that. She said, "It's not unusual in this kind of work. I know how to manage it." He said, "You shouldn't have to manage it." She said, "No." A pause. "But most things that shouldn't have to happen anyway." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "You have a son." Something changed in her face, not alarm, but a kind of adjustment, the way a person adjusts when a door opens in a wall they had assumed was solid. She said, "Oliver, he's 12. Does he live with you?" "Yes, and my mother. She's not well." She stopped. Then, as though checking herself, "I'm sorry. You don't need, I'm asking," he said. "I want to know." She looked at him steadily. Then she said, "My mother has early-stage dementia. She needs supervision during the day. I arrange for a neighbor to sit with her from 7 in the morning until Oliver gets home from school. He's 12 and he's very capable, but he's 12. She said the last sentence without self-pity, which made it considerably worse than if she had said it with some. Marcus said, "And your husband?" She said, "He died 3 years ago. He was an electrician. There was an accident on a commercial site. The utility room was very quiet. The washing machine made its low continuous sound." He said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Thank you." He said, The salary from this position. It covers what needs to be covered, she said. Not defensive, not grateful, simply accurate. He nodded once. He said, "Give me a few days." And he left. What Marcus did over the next 72 hours he did without telling Diana and without involving anyone in the house. He went back to the household file at 11 o'clock that same night, alone in his study with the lamp on and the rest of the house asleep. He reviewed the log of reported issues. There were 12 entries in 14 months. All from Diana. All targeting Rose's work specifically, not the work of the 2 other household staff members who cleaned the lower floors and the guest rooms, and who had, in that same period, received not a single formal complaint. He noted the dates. He noted the language. He noted that each complaint was just specific enough to sound credible and just vague enough to resist verification. Someone had thought about how to word these things. He pulled the agency reference and called the estate in Wiltshire himself at 8 in the morning before Diana was awake. The woman who answered was the housekeeper who had worked alongside Rose for 6 of those 8 years, a woman named Patricia, who had the telephone manner of someone who says exactly what she means and no more. She said, without hesitation and without being asked to elaborate, that Rose Pemberton was the most reliable, most quietly capable, most genuinely decent person she had worked alongside in 30 years of household service. She said the word genuinely with the specific weight of someone who had worked in enough households to know the difference between performed decency and the real thing. She said Rose had left Wiltshire only because the estate was sold and the new family brought in their own staff, and that it had been, as far as Patricia was concerned, the new family's loss entirely. Marcus thanked her and ended the call and sat at his desk with the phone in his hand for another minute. Then he called a private investigator. Not to look into Rose. He was already beyond needing to look into Rose. He called one to look into the agency and into the particular pattern of placements and terminations that had begun to arrange itself in his mind into a shape that was too consistent to be coincidence. It took 48 hours. The investigator was thorough. What he brought back was cleaner than a hunch and worse than a suspicion. Diana had terminated, in the 2 years Marcus had owned this house, 7 members of household staff. 6 of them through the same agency. Every single one had left a record. Incomplete. Unofficial, scattered across the employment history and the kinds of places only someone looking for them would find, of the same pattern. Escalating demands. Documented failures that didn't align with external references. Termination on grounds of performance. The agency's owner was Diana's college friend. The agency collected a placement fee every time. Marcus sat at his desk with a report in front of him and thought about Rose folding a cloth in the utility room and saying, "To whom, sir?" He thought about Oliver, age 12, coming home from school to sit with his grandmother so that Rose could be screamed at in a marble hallway for a floor that she had cleaned at 6:45 that morning. He thought about a degree in early childhood education that had never been used. He thought about all the mornings he had said good morning in a corridor and gone back to looking at his phone. He called Diana into his study at 7 on a Thursday evening. The study was the room in the house he had arranged entirely himself, bookshelves on 3 walls, a desk that was large enough to work at and old enough to have belonged to his father, a pair of chairs in front of the window that he had bought at an auction and never been entirely sure about, but had kept anyway, because sitting in them felt like sitting in something that had absorbed enough of other people's thinking to be useful. He was already at his desk when Diana came in, which he had done deliberately, and he asked her to sit, which she did, in one of the auction chairs, with the poise of a woman who does not expect to be surprised in her own husband's study. He was calm. He had decided to be calm before he started, because calm was more useful than anger in this room, and he needed to be useful. He had found, in 30 years of difficult conversations, that the person who raises their voice is usually the one who has run out of arguments. He had not run out of arguments. He had rather too many. He laid the report on the desk. He said, "I want you to read the first 3 pages." She looked at the report. She looked at him. She said, "Marcus, please read the first 3 pages." She read them. He watched her face do the thing it did when it was working. The tiny recalibrations, the adjustments, the selection of a register. When she finished, she set the report down and folded her hands. She said, "This is an interpretation." He said, 7 people. Diana, 6, through the same agency. Every one of them with a reference that contradicted your stated reason for terminating them. She said, "Running a household is not as simple. Rose Pemberton has a mother with dementia and a 12-year-old son and a dead husband, and she has been coming to this house every day for 14 months and cleaning your floors to an exceptional standard, and you have been screaming at her for 10 of those months, and I have been sitting in my study, not paying attention." He stopped. "That part is on me. The rest of it is on you." Diana said nothing. He said, "I'm going to ask you to move out of this house while I speak to my lawyer. I'll cover the apartment for 6 months. After that, we'll sort out the rest through the appropriate process." She looked at him for a long moment. The composed authority was still there. He had always admired her composure. He looked at it now and thought, "I mistook this for character. It is not the same thing." She said, "You're doing this over a cleaning woman." He said, "I'm doing this because I watched you scream at a woman who has earned nothing but respect from this house, and when I looked into it, I found out it wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the first person. And I have been in this marriage long enough to know that the person I'm looking at right now is not someone I'm going to be able to trust again." Diana stood. She smoothed her jacket. She walked to the door, and then stopped, and without turning around, she said, "She's just staff, Marcus," he said. "She is a person who has been doing her job with more dignity than anyone in this house has shown her, including me." Diana left. He sat in the quiet of the study for a long time. The lamp made a warm circle on the desk. Outside, the garden was going dark in the particular way of autumn evenings. The light retreating incrementally, the shapes of the trees becoming suggestions. He thought about a marble hallway and a woman holding a mop handle and the 3 words she had spoken in a voice that did not break. He called his PA and asked her to get the agency file and the full employment record, and to send the relevant documents to his lawyer, first thing in the morning. Then he put the phone down and sat quietly for another minute, looking at the pattern the lamp made on the ceiling, and listening to the house be silent around him, in the way that houses are silent when the people in them have all, for different reasons, retreated somewhere interior. Then he went downstairs to find Rose. She was in the kitchen, preparing to leave for the day. Her coat was already on. A dark wool coat, well kept. The kind of coat that has been maintained carefully, because it needs to last. Her bag was over her shoulder. The kitchen was clean behind her, with the thoroughness of someone who cleans a space at the end of the day the way they would want to find it at the beginning of the next. She looked up when he came in with the particular readiness of someone who has learned over many months to interpret the quality of a person's arrival before they speak, to read, from the pace and the posture and the angle of approach, whether what is coming is administrative, critical, or something harder to categorize. He said, "I owe you an apology." "More than one." She said, carefully, "Mr. Hale, please, let me finish." He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down, which changed the geometry of the room. He was no longer a man in a doorway. He was a man sitting at a kitchen table asking someone to listen. I was not paying attention to what was happening in this house. That is not an excuse. You and 6 other people before you were treated in a way that I should have seen and stopped, and I didn't see it because I wasn't looking. I'm sorry for that. Rose stood in her coat and said nothing. Her expression was the same expression she had worn in the hallway the day before, settled, at cost. But something behind it had shifted a fraction toward something more open. He said, I want to tell you what I'm planning to do, and I want to ask you something afterward. She said, all right. First, I'm terminating the arrangement with the agency, and I'm sending their records to the relevant employment board. The pattern of placements and terminations needs to be examined properly. 6 people before you deserve that, at a minimum. He paused. Second, I've spoken to my HR director about an opening that exists in my building services firm. Not here. Not in this house. A role in the main office. Training coordinator for new household and hospitality staff. The person who held it retired in August and we haven't filled it. It's a full contract, a salary increase, and it uses your degree. He watched her face. You have a qualification you've never used. I'd like to offer you a context in which to use it. Rose was still. He said, and I want to establish, through the firm, formally, a fund. It'll cover supplemental care costs for employees who are managing elder care situations alongside their working hours. It'll be called the David Pemberton Assistance Fund. After your husband. He said it simply, without ceremony, because he thought she would prefer that. We have a lot of people in the company who are in similar situations. It should have existed already. The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the wall made its small mechanical sound. Rose sat down. She sat down carefully, the way a person sits when their legs have made a decision before their composure is caught up with it. She set her bag on the floor beside the chair and looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at him and said, Oliver wants to study architecture. He said, the fund will cover tutoring costs, and I have a colleague who runs a mentorship program for young people interested in design and construction. I can make an introduction when Oliver's ready. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the kitchen settled around them into the specific domestic stillness of early evening, the garden beyond the window going fully dark now. The clock, the faint distant sound of the street. Then she said, my husband used to say that a person's real character is what you see when they think no one is looking. Marcus said, he was right. She said you weren't looking. No, he didn't qualify it. I wasn't. She nodded. Slowly, she said, but you looked eventually. She stood and picked up her bag. She said, I'll think about the position. I'll give you an answer by the end of the week. He said, take whatever time you need. She walked to the kitchen door. She paused there, not because she had anything more to say, but with the quality of pause that belongs to a moment before something changes irrevocably, and the person in it is aware of that and wishes to register it properly. Then she walked down the corridor to the front door, and he heard the click of the latch, and she was gone. Marcus sat alone in the kitchen for a while. He had not eaten. He was not hungry. He looked at the chair where she had sat and thought about the specific weight of the things she had carried in this house for 10 months. The daily discipline of maintaining her composure in the face of someone who had weaponized their authority against her. And he thought about how quietly and without complaint she had carried it. Because there was no one to tell, and Oliver needed the salary, and her mother needed the care, and the floor had to be cleaned either way. He thought about David Pemberton, who had been an electrician and had died on a commercial site. and who had left behind a woman with a degree she couldn't afford to use and a 12-year-old son who wanted to build things. He thought about the fund bearing that man's name. It seemed, in the quiet of the kitchen, like the smallest possible beginning of something right. It was not enough. He was not under any illusion that it was enough. But it was specific, and it was named, and it was real. And he had learned, in the last 72 hours, in a way that was likely to stay with him, that the difference between something vague and something specific is the difference between a gesture and a fact. The following Friday, Rose Pemberton accepted the position. She started on the 1st of the month. On her first day in the main office, Marcus had Oliver's name added to the mentorship program waitlist and sent a brief note to his colleague in Edinburgh to expect a contact in 2 or 3 years. A boy who wanted to build things, a father who had been an electrician. A quality of determination that he suspected ran in the family. His PA asked, with the careful neutrality of a woman who had worked for him for 9 years and knew better than to push, whether there was anything else to action. He said yes. The fund documentation needed to be finalized, the naming confirmed in writing, and a small plaque, not ceremonial, just accurate and permanent, placed in the staff common room of the building services firm, the David Pemberton Assistance Fund, established for employees managing care responsibilities alongside their working lives. The date and the name and nothing else. His PA said, "That's a good thing you're doing." He said, "It's overdue. Put it in the calendar for the 10th. The plaque went up on the 10th. Rose was there when it was installed. She stood in the common room and looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, he would have thought that was exactly right. He went back to his desk. The Edinburgh hotel proposal was open on his screen. He closed it and opened it again from the beginning, the way you look at something when you have realized you were reading it too fast. He read the section on staffing models. He read the section on employee welfare provisions. He made 6 annotations that had not been in the original brief, and sent them to his head of operations with a note that said these need to be structural, not supplemental. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked through you rather than at you, if you have ever been the person who showed up and did the work and kept your voice steady and folded your composure around yourself like a coat in a cold hallway, then you know that it takes something extraordinary to keep doing that, without losing the quality that makes you worth seeing in the first place. Most people, in those circumstances, lose something. A small but permanent piece of the thing that makes them generous. Rose Pemberton had not lost it. She had kept it intact across 10 months of deliberate diminishment and carried it to work every morning and held it in her hands the way she held the mop handle, without drama, without expecting anyone to notice, because the thing itself was worth keeping regardless of whether anyone ever did. The measure of a person is not what they do when the room is watching. Any competent performer can manage that. The measure of a person is what they keep when they believe the room has turned away, what they carry when they think it will never be seen, what remains in them, undiminished, when everything around them has been arranged to make them believe it doesn't matter. It always matters. The room turns back eventually. And what it finds there, what it finds intact, undamaged, quietly and stubbornly still present, is the only thing that was ever real to begin with.